Oke. Ya, mungkin kita mulai saja ya, sambil kita nanti bisa olahraga dulu gitu ya. Oke. The honorable guest speakers, distinguished guests, fellow students, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am Fatwa Sari Tetra Dewi. I come from the Department of Health Behavior, Environment and Social Medicine, Faculty of Medicine, Public Health and Nursing, Universitas Gadjah Mada. It is my pleasure to be the moderator for this serial seminar. Before we start the seminar, because it is already afternoon in Indonesia, I think we need to research our energy. What do you think about that? I would like you to have a stretching moment for a few minutes. We have a video and we can follow the instruction on the video. Are you ready? Monggo silakan Mbak untuk videonya.
Salam sehat bugar produktif. Bapak Ibu, sekarang waktunya peregangan. Setelah 2 jam kita bekerja pada posisi yang sama, kita perlu melakukan peregangan dan bergerak. Kegiatan ini untuk mengurangi kelelahan dan memulihkan konsentrasi. Mari kita tinggalkan sejenak pekerjaan kita untuk melakukan peregangan.
Siap, 7, 8. Atur nafas, ambil nafas dari hidung, buang dari mulut. Kita masuk peregangan dinamis. Masuk peregangan statis. Adalah peregangan untuk tubuh bagian bawah. Kita ulangi arah lain. Gerakan terakhir dari latihan pendinginan.
Contoh
Okay. So, how do you feel? Okay, let's back to our agenda. Before we start the seminar, because it is already afternoon, we already have stretching, and I think that we are now is ready for the seminar. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Now we feel fresh. Let's go to continue the seminar. with the management from the Public Health Postgraduate Program, Faculty of Medicine, Public Health and Nursing, Universitas Gadjah Mada Yogyakarta, arrange a weekly seminar for our master student lecturer in the faculty. We call it as a Wednesday seminar, in order to enrich our perspective on various up-to-date issues. And this Wednesday seminar is a special occasion because we also invite our alumni to join in order to improve their perspective as a continuous learner and openly discuss for possible improvement in health promotion practice or in public health practice as general. In the seminar, we have the title Health Promotion Challenge in Media Development, How to Prepare For. As we know that we now on a digital era, this shifting has sped up during COVID-19 pandemic. And as a public health profession, we need to improve our knowledge on how to choose and deliver a message so that is suitable with the audience preference. This afternoon, we have our outstanding speakers join and keen to share their expertise to us. We have a guest speaker from Visipol UGM, Ibu Wahyu Kostiningsih, MA, and Professor Karian Ripes from Universitat Oberta de Catalunya, Spain. Their expertise, whom I believe will enrich our insight and knowledge regarding how to pick and wrap a message for promoting health in this digital era. Professor Kam, can you hear my voice?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. And Ibu Wahyu, are you already here now? Are you join us now? Can you hear my voice?
Iya, Bu Fatwa, maaf ini agak error internet di sini, tapi sekarang sudah dengar.
Okay, Alhamdulillah. Welcome to the seminar, Ibu Wahyu. Okay. Before the presentation begin, may I introduce to you all the first guest speaker. We have Mrs. Wahyu Kostiningsih, MA. She is a lecturer and researcher in Department of Sociology, Faculty of Sociology, Social and Political Science, Universitas Gadjah Mada. She is also the manager of research, publication, and community service unit in the same faculty. She holds a Master of Arts in Sociology, Department of Sociology, Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Universitas Gadjah Mada, and Bachelor from the same school. She has a long experience list. I select some of her experience related to health. In 2020, she joined the research project titled The Governance of COVID-19 Pandemic Crisis Management Policy in Indonesia. In 2019, she joined the research project titled Livelihood Social Networks and Resources Across the Life Course in Indonesia. In 2015, she joined the research project titled Contesting the Family and Parenting of Children of Migrants in Kulon Progo. So she did both qualitative and quantitative methods. And she is also active in writing, especially book chapter as author or editor. In 2020, she wrote the book chapter titled Perempuan and Hidden Inequality in Era Adaptasi Kebiasaan Baru Akibat COVID-19, or Women and Hidden Inequality in the Era of New Normal Due to COVID-19. In 2020, together with Nur Hadi, she wrote a book chapter titled Penguatan Modal Sosial dalam Mitigasi COVID-19, or Strengthening the Social Capital in Mitigating of the COVID-19. Her working on observing, analyzing, and interpreting the public issue in the society has been long known not only in UGM. She will share us her expertise on how to develop a health promotion media, how to select issue and develop the appropriate message. Secondly, we have Professor Karian Ripes. She is a head professor at UOC and a part-time assistant professor in the University of Girona, or UDG. She holds a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology. Okay, luar biasa. Extraordinary background that you move from biochemistry to the public health and also to the health area, Professor Karm. She holds a PhD from the University of Barcelona and also master in biotechnology and a master in conflictology. So you has 2 master's degree. Previously, she has been senior researcher at the Agency of Health Quality and Assessment of Catalonia, or CHATA, until 2016, and the director of Fundació UDG Medicine, a non-profit organization linked to University of Girona 2015 until 2015. And her research has gone from the basic biochemical science to translational medicine and impact assessment, as you can see on her background. She is the director of the master degree in e-health and also a new World Health Organization or collaborating center in the field of e-health. She is the principal investigator of e-health lab research group, and she is leading now the design and assessment of e-health intervention area knowledge in the e-health center at UOC. The e-health center is an academic center whose main goal is to capacitate and empower citizens and professionals through the use of technology so that they can lead the paradigm shift in health. I think you have very long CV, Professor Kam, that I cannot finish, but your background and your expertise and your job is very fit with what we want to know now. And today, Professor Kam is going to share us her expertise in mHealth for health promotion, digital health, mHealth. Does anything cool? Okay, because it is a panel discussion, so we have the first session. Ibu Wahyu will present for 20 minutes and to share your expertise. Then we go for the second guest speaker, Professor Kam. And after that, we will have a discussion. And may I have you to manage the time without disturb your presentation by ringing the bell if you have 2 minutes left. And also for ladies and gentlemen, if you have any question during Ibu Wahyu presentation, you can write it down on the chat room, or you can ask in English or in Bahasa, or you can ask directly later in the discussion session. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ibu Wahyu Kostiningsih.
Bu Wahyu seems have trouble with the connection. I think Bu Fatwa.
Okay. Okay. Then why don't we change? Is it okay for you, Professor Kam, to have the presentation first?
Sure, no problem.
So please, welcome.
Okay, so I will share my screen. Can you see it now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much to invite me to join you during this seminar. It's exciting for me, you know, being so far away and being able to be with you this afternoon for you, this morning for me. So before the start, let me share with you some images from where I am. I don't know if you've never been in Barcelona, but this is the city of Barcelona. As you can see, it's a very square city. It's not a very crowded city compared to Asian cities for sure. It's just 1.5 million people living here. And now we are all living here because we are not allowed during the weekends to go out because of the COVID pandemic. So we have a partial lockdown now. So here you have some other images. Architecture is quite known, but also football is very well known, and also the beaches here. But we also have very important companies linked to the health sector too. And we have a quite strong public health system here in the city, in the country, in fact. So for you to know how far we are now, I just look for this distance between Jakarta and Barcelona, and it seems that it's almost 17 hours flying, which is not sure. It's not true. It's going to be more, but we are really, really far away, but at the same time, very close now. So I'm happy, very happy to be there. So about my university, let me share you just a couple of images too. We are a very special university because we are a completely online university. We were founded only 25 years ago, so we are very, very new. And at that moment, in 1995, the founders of the university decided to have a completely online university. Imagine, at that moment, Not everybody was having an email account. Not everybody was having a computer at home, and smartphones were not there. Nobody was even dreaming of having a smartphone or the connection we have now. So I think I'm really, wow, amazed when I think of the person who really had the idea of creating the university. But nevertheless, we also, so our campus is completely virtual. Our students are completely real students, but they are always connected online. So our relation is always an online relation. But nevertheless, we have some buildings, these 2 buildings. It's not a lot, but that's where the staff works. So professors and researchers and administrative staff, we gather in these buildings, which are in the city of Barcelona. So our university started to be just, I'm not going to say just, but it was started being mainly a teaching university. And as I was saying, a completely online teaching university. But more and more, we've been into the research issue, and now we are focused into research, teaching, and for sure impact. So in fact, that's one of the issues why I met Fatwa for the first time, and it was through the umbrella organization, International Association of Universities, in which Gadjah Mada and my university, we are their members of this organization, and we are working now together in order to push the achievements of the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goal number 3, the one about health and well-being. So in fact, that's why we met there, and then we are doing some work, and I'm sure that Fatwa will tell you about it, if not today, in any other situation. So after this introduction, let me talk to you about my topic today, which I've given the title of Digital Health, Mobile Health, Does Anything Go? Anything Goes. So I will focus into the 3 parts of my speech. I'm going to start with digital health. I'm sure you all know what digital health is, or at least you have an idea of what it is. But let me tell you that even in 2005 already, there was a systematic review trying to find or to reach a consensus around a definition of what is e-health, what is digital health. And this has not stopped, because in 2017, we have like the 6th edition of this, what is e-health. So that means that it's not that clear. In fact, it's a new topic. It's something in relation between technology and health, but how can we define it? It's not that clear. In 2001, already almost 20 years ago, Günter Eichenbach, who is the editor of the Journal of Medical Internet Research, which is one of the most well-known and referenced journals in e-health, in digital health, defined e-health as an emerging field in the intersection of medical informatics, public health, business, referring to health services and information delivered or enhanced through internet and related technology. But this word, it was not only something in relation with technology, but also a change in state of mind, a way of thinking and attitude, and a commitment for network global thinking to improve healthcare at any level, locally, regionally, or worldwide. Then, if we move to 2017, we find the definition that Tim Shaw. Tim Shaw is a very interesting person working in Australia, in the University of Sydney, and he's been in charge of somehow organizing the e-health in the whole continent in Australia. So the definition that he and his team reached was that e-health was in between these 3 circles that you have in your screen. Health in our hands, so the computer, most of us have now very close to us. Then interacting for health through a website, through application, through whatever, and data. Data is a very, very, very relevant issue. Finally, if we look at the other part of the screen, you can see that I just looked for in Scopus the number of publications with the e-health word in it. And I was surprised to find that even in 1992, somebody was talking about e-health. Wow, that was a long time ago. And it's true that it's been growing, and so the academic evidence supporting e-health is growing, but it's not that high. You can see here that there were just 41,000 results, which is not that much. Just with the term e-health, no filters, no other restrictions. It was just a very simple search, just to have an overview of where we are. And where we are is that e-health is or digital health is in the mouth of a lot of people. And now with COVID-19, we are talking about it, but there's a lot to be done in terms of research and generating evidence around this topic. So the first thing I wanted to share with you is that in 2017, in my university, me and my team, we were given the task to organize a new master's degree in e-health. So what we did is to organize a qualitative study based on focus group discussions and semi-structured interviews. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but having as people who were participating were experts in e-health worldwide. And what I want to share with you is the 8 challenges that they were able to identify. And they say, whatever you do to train healthcare professionals in e-health, you have to consider these 8 challenges. Let me tell you which are these 8 challenges. The first one is that e-health is already creating a shift of paradigm. So it's here to bring some disruptive changes. It's not something that has came to do the same, but from paper to screen. It's something that is here just to do things completely different. It's not moving from a vinyl disc to a CD-ROM, but listening to music through a different model different model. Second challenge is about empowerment. So digital health is very useful to empower who? So to empower healthcare professionals and patients and citizens so that we all work in a team. So that's, again, a completely change of paradigm. Then the third challenge is data. So we have an enormous amount of data now. We're able to really collect data. But is this data robust enough, reliable enough? And what do we do with this data? Because we are just collecting data, and now really to take decisions based on data, that's not that clear. And I think nowadays with COVID-19, at least in my context, this is quite obvious that it's so difficult to have good data and to take decisions based on that. The fourth challenge is that we have a lot of tools. We have virtual reality, we have applications, we have, of course, software, blockchain, 5G, 3D printers, etc. But which of these tools are really useful in order to have a healthier society? So to have a good impact in the social determinants of health. That's the question tag again. The fifth challenge they identify is, okay, there are a lot of interventions that digital tools have been used in these interventions, but which of them are really worthy? So which of these interventions is working, which is giving added value? We need methodology to know how to assess, how to evaluate, how to validate all these interventions. And this methodology is not yet clear enough. And in case we identify value-based interventions, we have to implement them at a micro, meso, and macro level. And that also has a lot of barriers. And we have to be able to identify these barriers and to overcome them. The seventh challenge is that digital health has to help us to have a human-centered approach and to work in a multidisciplinary way. I don't know if you know this legend that you have in the left-hand side of the screen, that I think it was an Indian story that a lot of some people that were not able to see, blinded people, they were invited to identify what do they have in front of them. And so they were just able to touch it. And then so what they had in front of them was an elephant, but none of them was able to identify this. Why? Because they were only able to have the feeling of some part of this elephant. So some people thought that it was a tree or snake or spear or farm or wall or whatever, but none of them could be able to identify the whole elephant. So digital health, in fact, is that. So healthcare professionals are important, of course, but they are not the only one involved in digital health transformation. So we have a lot of different professionals, patients, and citizens that should all work together in order to achieve good results. And the eighth challenge is, let's do not lose the north. I don't know if this is an expression common in Indonesia, but what we mean is technology is very good, is very useful, but there are some things that cannot be changed or transformed with technology, and we have to really be aware of that. In fact, and we are since here March, I don't know when the tsunami of COVID-19 started in Indonesia, but since March here, the digital transformation, and not only of the healthcare system, but any system, educational system, the companies, whatever, is really, really being exponentially growing up. So when talking about digital health, it's very important to think outside the box, to be imaginative, to be creative, and to, as I was saying before, to try to think of, to do things in a different way completely. What about mobile health? Mobile health is inside the topic of digital health, of course, but when we talk about mobile health, we're talking about apps. So the number of existing health apps nowadays is very big, but how many of these apps are really useful and are being used? So not that many. So why are apps so special? I think we all know that we all have lots of apps in our smartphones, but how many of them are we using? So no matter all these positive things that you have in the slide now that the app have, most of the apps are not really used for a long time. And as I told you before, the evidence supporting the apps, the number of publications, the number of trials and research done to support the use of these apps is not that high. But if you go to the social media or to the newspaper or newsletter, you will find a lot of messages like the ones you have in the screen now. So the best app to lose weight, the best app to skip smoking, the best app to promote physical activity, etc., etc. In 2015, there was an editorial of British Medical Journal already 5 years ago, and the title was so straight to the point: which app should I use? So patients, doctor, everybody was at that moment already increasing the use of health apps, but there was no guidance about how well they work. So if you are a practitioner, if you are a nurse, which is the app you are going to suggest to your patient? It's not that clear. So why? Because there are a lot of challenges when using an app. And to have an app which is useful for everybody, that's not a good starting point. So what do we want to achieve with the app? A behavioral change. So we need to know in which step of this behavioral change journey we are. On the other hand, not everybody's got the same digital literacy. So that has to be considered too. But at the same time, not everybody's got the same health literacy. So here we have like two barriers, very important to be overcome, depending on who is the final user. And very important, the engagement issue. If I was physically with you, I will ask you to stand up and say, how many of you have been using a health app for more than 2 weeks? And some people would stand up, but it would not be the majority, I'm sure. So as I was saying before, it's very important to consider who are the final users of these apps. It's not the same if we are defining an intervention for old people or for teenagers or for people who are working, having a sedentary life, people who is working, I don't know, on the fields, or people who are with a high level of health literacy or not. So all these things have to be considered. On the other way, there are too many apps in the market now, and it's so difficult to say, okay, I'm going to the Apple Store, to the Google Play Store, and saying, okay, I want an application to skip smoking, or to recommend to my patients that they skip smoking. That's really difficult to identify. There's lack of evidence, and there are a lot of reasons to choose one application or not the other one. So with COVID-19, again, not in the promotion area or the health promotion area, because it has not been used for that, at least in my context, but for contact tracing, there have been applications all over the world. Some of these applications have been quite successful, like the ones in Singapore, but most of them have not really given any value because people are not using them. And so they are not really, it's like something that generates a lot of hope. So we are waiting for this app to be launched. But once it's launched, it seems that nobody is using it. So yeah, something is not very well done. So let's go to the third part of my speech. Anything goes in terms of digital and mobile health. As you can understand from what I've been talking to you, it's very important to be able to separate the grain from the chaff. So not all the applications, not all the digital health interventions are good enough to invest resources on them. But even though we are able to identify the grain, we need to identify and separate the oat from the wheat. So depending on the final user, depending on the topic we want to, on the aim that we want to achieve, the applications have to be very much different. Already 10 years ago, in 2010, there was a first experience of an organization, a public organization that's from the south of Spain, trying to build a repository of good, between brackets, health apps. So this already exists, and although it has been there for 10 years, there's only, I think, like between 30 and 40 apps, health apps, that they consider good enough. Imagine, we were talking about hundreds, thousands of health apps, and they consider only between 30 and 40 nowadays. And also in UK, the National Health System has been able finally to launch an app library. Why I am saying finally? Because they've been doing a hard work in order to identify how apps have to be really assessed in order to say, okay, me as a National Health System in UK recommend you to use this app. That's not that easy, and it has been very difficult for them, but now it seems it works. In the topic of nutrition, there's a new tool, not that new already, that's only for apps which main aim is to improve nutrition habits between population. There's this tool, AQEL, which is at least published and at least tested. Nowadays, there is a scale, the MARS, this mobile application rating scale, that it's quite well used, and more, I don't know if it's the reference, but there's a lot of interventions that are trying to use this scale in order to say, okay, my application is good in that point, not that good in the other point, and there's some room for improvement in these other dimensions. So the 4 dimensions they are considering are engagement, functionality, aesthetics, and information. And now there's a new version of this tool that is the yellow column in the screen about subjective quality, they call it. I don't like the name. That means the feedback from the users, from the final users. You can see how different is this subjective qualities, so the difference between the bottom and the top apps compared to the other dimensions. So these dimensions is really bringing the difference between different health apps. in this, specifically in this image, you have a comparison between some apps which are quite popular all over the world, like MyPlate, MyFitnessPal, etc. So let me finish my speech with an explanation of a project in which I'm the principal investigator, and it's going to be finished this year. And it's about the design and validation of a tool to assess mainly effectiveness of mHealth apps to manage and prevent overweight and obesity. So when did everything started? It was in 2014. I was already 6 years ago. I was attending a seminar, not a virtual one, it was a face-to-face one. And somebody was presenting an application to overcome the phobia to fly. So people who are not able to take planes because they are really, really suffering a lot. And somebody in the audience asked the presenter, okay, and how do you know that this works? And the presenter just answered, oh, these applications have got a certain amount of downloads. At that moment, my brain said, wow, if the only indicator we've got is the number of downloads, I'm not sure if we are doing a good job. So at that moment, I was working in an agency linked to the health system in Catalonia, which we were doing assessment and quality assessment of health interventions. So I talked to my director and said, oh, we have to do something. And we started a work, an international work with several organizations in order to define a framework of how mHealth interventions should be assessed. We were able to publish it in the JMIR in 2017. And so one of the conclusions were that the amount of dimensions that have to be considered and the amount of items that have to be considered when assessing mHealth apps is very high, but there's also a lack of tools. So we need to invest resources in developing good tools so that the assessment is quite easy to be done. So we started then the EvaLabs project, which the main aim was to design and validate a tool to assess efficacy, safety, and effectiveness of mHealth apps. What did we do? The first thing we did is to see what's up, what's going on, what has been really already done. We are not starting from scratch. So we performed a systematic review, and we were able to identify only, and I say only, 21 trials that had done some work in validating their health apps, whose main aim was to manage overweight and obesity. Only 21 trials. That's not a lot. And you can see in your screen what were the dimensions that they were analyzing in terms of outputs and outcomes. I'm not going to go deep into it because I think I'm too long already. And the second step was taking into consideration the dimensions that we identify in the framework and the dimensions that we identified through the systematic review. We said, okay, we have almost 200 dimensions to be assessed. That's not really pragmatical. Nobody will do that. So we have to reach a consensus and select the most important ones. So through a Delphi study with 2 rounds, we were able to identify only, again, between brackets, 56 criteria under these 7 dimensions that you have here. So up purpose, development, reliability, etc. This is also, if you want to check that, this is also published recently, some 2 or 3 months ago, we were able to publish that. Okay, that moment we knew what we want to evaluate of these health apps, but how are we going to do that? We decided to co-create an application to evaluate applications. And that was very interesting for us because we were at that moment able to know what was going on when you design an application. It's not that easy. For instance, we had budget just to hire a developer in order to develop the app. But then the result, sorry, but it was very ugly. It was not useful at all. It was not, attractive at all. So we knew at that moment that it was very important to have a designer already also with us working together. And we had never thought of that before. So it was a good experience for us. And we started to do these co-creation groups with final users, with developers, with researchers, etc., etc. And finally, we were able to have this EvaLabs app, which is already in the markets now, and that we piloted in just some months ago. And so we used 30 patients that really need to lose weight because of health issues. And thanks to their commitment, we could do the second iteration of the development of the app and then to improve it. And we did the final test that was interesting, because we tested it just during the lockdown, the complete lockdown here. So it was quite easy to recruit people. People were very much worried about a lot of things, and one of the things were about their eating habits. So we were able to recruit 260 participants. 4 years ago, when we started with the project, we'd never think that the final test would be that easy, and because of the lockdown. So that's some positive aspect of this lockdown that we were having here. But all the tests lasted for 3 weeks. So again, only 65% of the people who was able or was ready to finish till the end, and 71% of them were women. Thanks to that, we were able to identify, and we are now analyzing data, so I cannot really share with you the final results. In terms of, it's going to be just to select out of these 56 criteria, which ones are we going to skip because of not giving added value. But we are analyzing data in a clusterized way. So depending if people are healthcare professionals or are experts in technology, or are people not having a specific background or expertise in healthcare or technology, the results are going to be considered differently. So we are very clear that this tool is going to be like customized depending on who is going to be the final user. And that's my last slide. Based on that, we've learned a lot of lessons. We have already almost the final results, and we are planning to do more new methodological tools, so to develop new apps and to focus on different topics, not only in the overweight and obesity, but in mental health issues. So we're planning to focus in depression and anxiety, which is a very, very prevalent issue here. And there's a lot of apps not based on evidence that have been developed, and people think they are using, and it's doing nothing to them. So we want to bring some light into this topic too. And that's all that I wanted to share with you. I hope you find it interesting, and I will be ready to answer whatever question you may have later. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Carm. It's very interesting presentation that you have. So you can take more time if you want to. So I do not stop your presentation. And I think everybody, the audience is also like your presentation. And there are some questions in the chat, if I'm not mistaken, but can we hold until the discussion session?
Sure.
Okay, and now we can continue the presentation of Ibu Wahyu. Ibu Wahyu, are you already joined us? I think you already joined us, yeah? Yeah, okay. Thank you. You have your time now to have the presentation. Okay. Silakan monggo Bu, presentasi selama 20 menit.
Terima kasih. Thank you for Professor Carm, for your presentation. That was very interesting for me. Pakai bahasa Indonesia kemarin, Pak Lutfi pakai bahasa Indonesia. Suara saya bisa didengar dengan saya?
Bisa terdengar, tapi
sebelumnya. Oke.
Atau mungkin videonya dimatikan saja.
Saya ingin videonya aja ya. Oke.
Ya.
Oke. Sudah Pak? Sekali lagi.
Masih putus itu.
Internet musim hujan. Iya. Halo.
Halo.
Sudah kedengaran Bu?
Sudah.
Oke.
Mohon maaf sekali atas problem teknisnya. Tadi sih di kampus cuman pulang biar relax gitu, ternyata internetnya problem gitu. Terima kasih untuk sore ini, kesempatan sore ini saya akan diminta oleh Bu Fatwa dan juga Mbak Lutfi untuk berbagi tentang bagaimana sih membuat kreasi konten di sosial media gitu. Mungkin juga teman-teman sudah merasakan gitu, pandemi ini mengubah banyak hal dalam kehidupan kita. Salah satunya terkait bagaimana kita menggunakan media dalam hal ini IT ya, internet, teknologi, informasi kan, terutama penggunaan sosial media. Coba kalau teman-teman, kalau misal terjadi pandemi COVID-19 ini, sosial media belum seinstan gitu, apa yang kiranya teman-teman bisa lakukan gitu. Karena ini sebenarnya kalau bencana misalnya gitu, oke lah bantu bebersih, menyediakan barang dan sebagainya. Tetapi ketika pandemi ini terjadi, semua orang diharuskan untuk stay at home di rumah gitu, jaga jarak, yang padahal notabene kita tahu masyarakat kita sangat kompleks kan. Jadi sosial media ini membawa dimensi baru khususnya ke tentang isu-isu kesehatan dan mungkin satu-satunya tools atau mungkin alat yang bisa membantu kita sampai sekarang bisa melampaui pandemi ini ya salah satunya dengan adanya sosial media. Orang juga jadi terliterasi dengan baik, angka literasi menjadi naik, misalnya ibu rumah tangga gitu, karena COVID hal yang baru, kemudian mencari informasi lewat sosial media gitu, ini seperti apa sih? Karena nggak ada orang yang tahu persis sebelumnya COVID, karena COVID adalah baru. Jadi sosial media mempunyai power yang sangat besar gitu, tidak hanya untuk interaksi sosial, tapi juga untuk pendidikan. Selain itu, sosial media misalnya kayak kita sekarang itu kan kita bisa saling kolaborasi walaupun tempatnya terpisah jauh gitu. Saya yakin kalau nggak ada pandemi, nggak sampai in model Zoom semacam ini. Tetapi juga ada hal yang harus ini menjadi satu alat yang kita unggulkan ketika bicara kesehatan, khususnya ketika masa pandemi ini, karena seperti kita tahu masyarakat kita sampai saat ini masih menghadapi persoalan terkait hoax gitu kan, apalagi ketika pandemi muncul awal-awal itu kan ada yang bilang oh COVID itu kayak gini, ada lagi yang lain oh itu salah, yang benar kayak gitu kan. Jadi ada berbagai macam masyarakat juga belum tahu mana yang pasti, bahkan para akademisi mungkin ilmuwan dan lain sebagainya belum tahu yang fix seperti apa gitu kan. Jadi banyak isu beredar. Nah, saya mungkin langsung aja Mbak Lutfi di next slide. Oke, kita tadi berubah ya font-nya ya. Oke. Itu atas judulnya The Role of Social Media in Response to COVID-19. Oke, mungkin next aja Mbak. Saya hanya punya waktu 20 menit untuk menjelaskan. Oke, saya di sini menulis kita akan kreasi untuk kampanye di sosial adalah mapping the topics atau kemudian memilih target, kemudian mengkreasi kontennya, kemudian melakukan proofing, mengecek ulang dan lain sebagainya, kemudian publishing produknya, kemudian evaluasi. Mungkin next slide. Oke, terima kasih. Terkait the topic banyak tentang membuat kreasi ini saat ini sedang saya lakukan bersama timnya Bu Fatwa, membuat media untuk edukasi masyarakat gitu. Nah, sebelum membuat itu kita harus menentukan dulu targetnya apa ketika kita mau membuat social media campaigns. Apakah membuat masyarakat mengikuti apa yang kita mau, ataukah membuat masyarakat menjadi lebih kritis terhadap informasi, artinya ketika masyarakat itu publik mendapatkan informasi, kemudian mereka mulai mencari lebih dalam lagi gitu. Nah, posisi standing position kita sebagai yang memproduksi konten itu kita harus tentukan sejak awal. Nah, ketika misalnya kalau kita sebagai akademisi misalnya di sini, posisi kita adalah membuat masyarakat lebih kritis terhadap berbagai informasi, kemudian mereka bisa membuat keputusan sendiri berdasarkan literatur-literatur yang memadai untuk tahu bahwa pandemi COVID-19 ini pandang dari berbagai aspek ya. Kalau dari ilmiah jelas ini virus yang harus dengan proses-proses yang ilmiah gitu, melalui kajian dan lain sebagainya gitu. Tapi ada juga yang memandang virus ini azab dan lain sebagainya, tentu pendekatannya juga akan berbeda gitu kan, dan lain sebagainya. Ada yang memandang ini adalah politik gitu kan, kayak di Bali ini ekonomi politik gitu kan, virus ini gitu kan. Jadi banyak pandangan gitu kan. Nah, kalau kita misalnya sebagai akademisi di sini sebagai bagian dari komunitas ilmiah, tentu kita ketika membuat atau menentukan ide atau kira-kira apa sih yang menarik untuk diangkat, kita harus punya dasar dulu deh. Kita punya data gitu. Nah, data itu bisa ini sebenarnya hampir sama dengan riset ya, karena kalau namanya ilmiah juga basis pencarian datanya juga harus ilmiah. Nah, ilmiah itu kan bisa dipertambahkan. Nah, data sendiri kita bisa bagi dua, mau primary apa secondary. Nah, kalau primary bisa jadi misalnya kalau sekarang ya bisa jadi dari FGD gitu kan, focus group discussion gitu misalnya, ya model kayak Zoom sebanyak ekspor, kemudian atau bisa dari chat WhatsApp atau mungkin video call WhatsApp sebagainya. Kemudian ada banyak cara gitu. Bisa juga dengan polling gitu. Kita tanya ke masyarakat umum, kita polling sekilas kira-kira apa sih yang permasalahan apa sih yang didiskusikan gitu. Tentu kita kan diakses ya oleh banyak orang. Harap juga bahwa konten kita itu bisa menjawab kebutuhan dari banyak orang. Dengan demikian, ya kalau tahu apa yang dibutuhkan orang kan ya kita harus nyata kebutuhan yang paling mereka atau masyarakat mau atau publik inginkan itu kayak apa. Polling ini cukup membantu, apalagi kalau polling juga gampang banget kan, bisa dari form, bisa dari SurveyMonkey dan sebagainya. Tapi biasanya orang akan pakai Google Form karena dia terintegrasi dengan email di smartphone. Karena orang kan minimal punya satu smartphone ya, jadi sangat mudah sekali gitu. Bagaimana dengan secondary data? Secondary data bisa kita peroleh dari literatur review. Kalau kita bicara COVID misalnya sekarang gitu, selama kalau saya perhatikan berbagai jurnal ilmiah dan juga tulisan berbasis ilmiah populer dan sebagainya itu cukup banyak. Nah, itu sebenarnya bisa menjadi basis kita untuk menentukan topik atau bisa jadi membantu kita untuk mensupport nanti konten-kontennya akan berbeda seperti redaksinya. Nah, itu bisa dimanfaatkan. Kemudian sosial media. Nah, sosial media ini tentu ini sangat dengan teman-teman semua gitu. WhatsApp misalnya, selama COVID ini tentu di WhatsApp group pasti setiap orang dari teman-teman semua itu di HP-nya itu bisa ada WhatsApp group jumlahnya mungkin 50, 100 gitu pasti ada kan ya. Pasti dan di situ informasi yang terjadi yang masuk yang banyak sekali kan. Pada selama COVID, 2-3 bulan COVID awal gitu kita sudah over information. Jadi kita udah sangat banjir informasi sampai kita tuh sangat jenuh dengan informasi. Ketika misalnya ada orang bicara COVID lagi itu kita udah benar-benar jenuh dan sampai kita nggak bisa membedakan mana sih sebenarnya yang benar atau enggak karena kita sudah sangat capek. Karena informasi yang beredar itu sangat luar biasa selama COVID ini gitu kan. Kemudian belum lagi dari Instagram, kemudian dari Facebook, kemudian dari Twitter. Nah, yang sangat ramai banget itu biasanya Twitter gitu kan, karena interaksinya cukup luar biasa di Twitter. dibandingkan kalau kata saya, kalau saya bawahi pakai Twitter nggak? Saya punya Twitter tapi nggak update di Twitter gitu. Saya ketinggalan zaman gitu loh. Saya nggak pakai Line gitu karena saya lebih prefer pakai WhatsApp misalnya. Saya ketinggalan info dari mahasiswa saya karena mayoritas pakai Line gitu. Banyak kali sosial media yang sebenarnya itu jadi jalan untuk atau jadi media untuk alur informasi. Kemudian ada mass media, ada misalnya ada Kompas, ada Tempo dan lain sebagainya. Mass media ini juga punya setiap publisher sendiri, mana yang pro ke pemerintah, mana yang kontra dan lain sebagainya, mana yang basisnya ilmiah dan lain sebagainya. Kita sebagai orang yang membuat konten bisa mengidentifikasi jenis media itu dan ada kepentingan apa di baliknya gitu. Karena jujur saja ketika kita masuk masyarakat yang kita bilang informasi gitu, yang full dengan informasi ini, pikiran kritis, analisa kritis itu penting banget untuk ditumbuhkan. Jadi tidak serta-merta melihat berita, oh itu dari publisher ini dia publish berita ini gitu kan. Itu kan tidak serta-merta kita saat ini ketika kita dituntut masyarakat digital ini tidak serta-merta kita mengamini apa yang disampaikan. Tentu kita harus melakukan cek dan recheck. Nah, itu pula yang akan ketika ide kita setiap orang itu punya pengalaman ke rumah saudara dan lain sebagainya. Kita pasti di jalan bisa di sebelah. Artinya ketika kita melakukan mapping topik ini, sensitivity
Suaranya putus-putus ya, Bu.
analisis kritis ini putus-putus ya?
Oh ya, Bu.
Bentar,
Suaranya
Bu. Kalau sekarang masih putus-putus nggak?
Ya, masih sudah lumayan. Ini waktunya
Hidup di negara ini sudah ya, oke. Oke, Bu. Oke, langsung ke slide berikutnya mungkin. Mbak Lutfi, mohon di slide berikut. Baik, ini suara saya sudah kedengaran ya, Bu ya?
Sudah, cuma
Suara sudah
putus, Bu.
Oke. Maafkan saya, Ibu.
Oh,
Baik, selanjutnya ketika kita sudah melakukan terhadap tema itu, kita bisa membuat kita bisa memilih target, sudah mapping, oh ini loh berbagai isu yang muncul yang menarik, oh ini loh topik-topik yang hangat saat ini gitu kan. Misalnya kita harus cek dulu, kita mau bikin konten ini untuk siapa? Apakah untuk perempuan, laki-laki, untuk orang yang tua, lansia, atau orang yang muda, atau orang yang tinggal di kota dengan berbagai aksesnya, dan atau mungkin untuk orang yang tinggal di desa, misalnya dengan mungkin beberapa keterbatasannya, atau ini untuk orang yang punya pendidikan tinggi, atau mungkin untuk orang yang pendidikannya biasa aja, atau untuk orang awam. Nah, itu harus diputuskan. Kenapa demikian? Karena ini akan berimplikasi dengan redaksi yang akan dipakai nanti. Apakah bahasanya akan bahasa ilmiah misalnya atau tidak. Nah, itu yang harus dipertimbangkan. Pertimbangan berikutnya yaitu terkait urgenitasnya. Mana sih topik yang paling urgent? Contoh, ketika saat ini, pada momen ini, tentu yang paling hot gitu kan, paling in gitu, itu adalah seputar vaksin. Di mana orang udah nunggu-nunggu vaksin yang katanya digadang-gadang akhir Desember 2020 udah akan udah akan ada gitu. Walaupun kemarin saya berapa kali panel dengan beberapa expert gitu bilang bahwa sampai sekarang juga vaksin belum selesai. Nah, itu yang harus diidentifikasi ketika sudah punya mapping terkait data, kemudian kita tentukan target, kemudian kita tentukan topik prioritasnya. Nah, proses menentukan ini kita melalui brainstorming. 'brainstorming. Nah, brainstorming ini tentu ketika kita produksi konten kan kita bisa jadi brainstorming, kita bisa jadi diskusi, kita bisa jadi, 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 bersama-sama. Nah, brainstorming ini bisa jadi proses yang alot gitu kan, karena semua orang pasti punya kepentingan. Tetapi ingat, fokusnya adalah tadi prioritasnya apa ketika produksi konten. Nah, itu yang harus menjadi catatan sendiri. Mungkin selanjutnya Mbak Lutfi. Mohon selanjutnya, next slide. Oke, terima kasih. Kemudian lanjut ke bagaimana mengkreasikan media konten. Bahwa tipe media ini ada video, ada foto, audio visual misalnya, atau untuk yang visual ada namanya flyer, ada poster. Nah, kita mau bentuk seperti apa? Dengan tadi sudah menentukan target, oh misalnya anak muda itu lebih suka pakai video yang ada suaranya gitu. Oh ini untuk orang yang usianya lanjut gitu. Karena usia lanjut itu akan kesulitan kalau misalnya dari poster gitu. Oh ini untuk orang yang tinggal di kota yang akses akses terhadap misalnya internet dan sebagainya lancar dan sebagainya, kemudian pendidikan mereka bagus gitu. Oh mungkin lebih cocok video karena biasa mereka YouTube gitu misalnya. Nah itu harus diidentifikasi gitu. Penekanannya pada semuanya harus balik lagi ke targetnya dan tujuan-tujuannya. Nah, jangan sampai melenceng. Ibaratnya kalau riset itu kan udah ada riset question. Nah, target dan purpose itu yang selalu jadi guide kita ketika kita buat media konten. Nah, ketika kita mengkreasikan itu, kita harus juga berpikir resiko dan dampaknya. Seringkali orang memproduksi konten di media sosial itu, mereka tidak berpikir terkait resiko dan dampaknya. Resiko seperti apa? Misalnya resiko misalnya ketika kita bicara vaksin gitu kan, ketika kita buat konten itu nggak jelas gitu, orang kemudian mengamini apa yang kita sampaikan gitu, pada titik tertentu ternyata apa yang kita sampaikan ada kesalahan atau sebagainya. Nah itu yang harus diperhatikan. Oke, next slide mungkin karena udah oke. Baik. Oke, yang langkah keempat adalah proving produknya gitu. Jadi harus dicek ulang. Proses cek dan recheck sebenarnya dari setiap tahap itu selalu dilakukan. Tetapi ketika sudah proving, artinya konten itu udah hampir final gitu kan, hampir final. Kemudian tinggal memastikan apakah ada informasi-informasi yang masih salah gitu kan, misalnya karena ini isunya kesehatan yang sangat krusial gitu, sangat basic banget dan basic dalam kehidupan manusia, dan tentu kalau salah informasi jual gitu akibatnya, nah itu harus dipastikan lagi gitu. Kemudian soal private, mana yang boleh disampaikan ke publik, mana yang tidak, itu etikanya juga harus diperhatikan. Dan juga misalnya konsekuensi terhadap kesehatannya, misalnya konsekuensi terhadap psikologisnya dan lain sebagainya. Ketika kita mengeluarkan konten tertentu, misalnya ketika itu berdampak secara psikologis, berdampak negatif secara psikologis terhadap masyarakat, itu kita juga harus mempertimbangkan ulang untuk jangan-jangan redaksinya yang salah atau apanya gitu. Nah, kita harus mengidentifikasi berbagai hal itu. Kemudian selanjutnya, Mbak. Oke. Langkah kelima itu adalah mempublikasikan produknya gitu. Ketika kita pakai sosial media, kita punya banyak site sosial media, ada Facebook, ada LinkedIn, ada Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, WhatsApp dan lain sebagainya gitu. Kita harus paham karakteristik dari tiap sosial media itu seperti apa. Misalnya produksi konten yang lebih banyak, poster lebih banyak, kita akan kesulitan misalnya untuk ke Instagram. Ya bisa diposting, tetapi kan menjadi tidak efektif gitu. Harus tahu dulu itu nanti akan sudah tentu bentuk atau live-nya atau misalnya kalau video durasinya gitu kan. Misalnya kalau video singkat di Instagram akan berbeda dengan YouTube kan, yang lebih panjang gitu kan. Nah, itu yang harus diperhatikan juga oleh produksi konten. Next mungkin Mbak. Oke, yang terakhir evaluasi Jadi ketika sudah dilakukan publikasi, sudah dipublis konten-konten tersebut gitu kan, kita harus bisa melakukan mapping lagi terkait respon positif dan respon negatif. Kenapa ini penting? Karena jujur ketika kita sudah ibaratnya ini kan langkah-langkah kampanye ini kan sebenarnya bagian dari advokasi sosial. Ketika advokasi sosial tentu kita berusaha untuk ibaratnya membantu masyarakat gitu kan, mensupport masyarakat untuk melalui sebuah krisis gitu. Ketika kita produksi konten, apakah konten itu benar-benar bisa menjawab kebutuhan masyarakat, atau jangan konten itu justru memunculkan respon negatif karena kita melakukan beberapa kesalahan redaksi gitu dan lain sebagainya. Itu harus, dan terus setelah proses evaluasi tersebut kemudian kita bisa meningkatkan misalnya kualitas ini yang lalu dilakukan. Jangan ketika kita sudah mempublikasikan konten kita pikir sudah selesai. Tidak, impact-nya luar biasa dan kita tahu bahwa jejak digital itu cukup berbahaya ketika misalnya, karena nggak bisa dihapus jejak digital itu, orang dengan mudah download dan lain sebagainya. Nah itu yang harus benar-benar kita antisipasi, kita harus hati-hati ketika kita memproduksi konten, bukan menakuti, bukan membuat takut dan lain sebagainya gitu kan, tapi kita karena kita basisnya sebagai akademisi misalnya, kita harus benar-benar bisa mempertanggungjawabkan konten-konten yang kita produksi, apalagi ini untuk bagian advokasi. Saya mungkin lebih banyak akan diskusi saja. Tadinya saya mau kasih contoh, tapi mungkin waktu 20 menit nggak akan cukup gitu. Monggo silahkan. Makasih Bu Fatwa.
Yeah. Terima kasih Bu Wahyu. Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. Sayang ya agak putus-putus suaranya, tapi that's fine because we can read from your presentation and we can relate with what you mentioned. Okay, now we are come to the discussion session. I can see that there are some questions on the chat, but we also have Mbak Vena. Would you please share the resume of the question in the chat?
Okay, I will listen.
There is the first question from Pak Gonggo to Professor Kam. He is asking how to compare effectiveness of e-health in web-based and versus in apps in reaching and how to reach the user.
So can you repeat, Fatwa? How to compare effectiveness?
Yeah, how to compare?
Yeah,
how to compare the effectiveness of e-health between web-based with the apps and health, web-based and also health to reach the end user.
I don't really know if this is the final aim is to compare the different tools, because depending on the final user, as I've been saying before, the objective is going to be different. But sometimes the things that are really being more successful is like having a multi-platform approach. So your final aim is target to, for instance, improve physical activity. So if you have a web page together with some apps, together with some sensors all together, this can be more effective than just having a face-to-face contact from time to time with your practitioner, for instance. So I always like to talk about interventions in a whole, and then apps are one of the tools inside these interventions.
Okay, so it is they have their own advantage and disadvantages for every channel, yeah. For example, the web page, we can share more text on the web page. In the apps, there are different things, and to have the multi-platform intervention is is the best. It's better than only single. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and also I'm now a supervisor of a PhD in Kenya, that they are using a different way. They are not really apps. It's not an SMS message neither, but something in the middle. You know, the name of this strategy is USSD. Never mind that. It's something that I have discovered thanks to the situation in Kenya, that maybe in Indonesia you have some areas that could be similar to those in Kenya, where the internet is not really reaching the whole population. The kind of smartphones that people got are not last generation smartphones. So you need interventions from a technological point of view, which are targeted to specific groups of people. And this is another strategy. So yes, what I wanted to say is that depending on who you are working with, if it's people living in the cities with good connection and with some middle resources, then your intervention is going to be different to that sent to somebody living in a small town, high in the mountains, with difficulties to have internet access, for instance.
Okay, thank you, Professor Kam. There is also a second question to you. This is from Rabiatul Adariyah. Do you have any recommendation on how to start working and having a collaboration with many expertise? When we listen to your presentation, you said that you have a collaboration and it might be with many expertise people. And how did you start the collaboration?
Yeah, the multidisciplinarity is hard. You have to be ready to have long discussions, long meetings. But the most important thing is to be able to communicate in a proper way. And when I say communicate in a proper way, for instance, I think I'm lucky because, as you mentioned, I come from basic sciences. So my PhD is in biochemistry, but my degree was in chemistry. So I've been always moving from one discipline to another, and I've been always forced to adapt my language and my former background to the situation that I have in a specific moment. That if you've been always working only with nurses or only with practitioners or only with, it's quite more difficult. And it's the same for people which have been only working with the technology area. So they take for granted lots of things. You take for granted lots of things, and then communication is like difficult. And yeah, it's true. I don't know which is the recommendation, but the first recommendation is to really have a high level of empathy. So you are aware that the other person may not understand what you want him or her to understand. So to invest a lot of time in improving your communication so that the message reaches to the people, and at the same time that your ears are very high, very big, in order to listen carefully and to try to understand what the others want to tell you. And then if you have a good relation in terms that you understand the people and people understand you, then the work is much more easy. But then you need to work one by one. So you need to work. It's not, okay, we share tasks, you do that and you do that. No, we have to meet very often. We have to sit one by the other and work together in something. That's the only way to really understand the other and to have a fruitful work. And that's investing a lot of time in the beginning. But after some time, this is going to be very much fruitful and interesting.
Okay. That's very interesting. So you are trying to make what we call it as a lobbying, negotiating, using their communication, the way of communication, adaptation of the communication, and then you have the trust each other, and then you can continue with the collaboration. How long was it take, Professor Kam, to really can develop good teamwork?
Wow, that's a difficult question too. I don't know how long, but a long time.
Okay, there is also the third question is also for you, Professor Kam. Sorry for that. It seems that everybody is also interesting to ask you. How could with e-health apps handle the mental health issue in the internet?
That's a very interesting issue. More and more, and now with COVID, we'll see what happens with the mental health of the people, because we are now approaching what's going on in the hospitals, with the people who are dying because of COVID and so on. But now, it's at least here, the indicators say that the mental health of the population is very weak. So technology is going to play a very interesting role in that. But what can we do through the technology platforms? It's true that teleconsultation and telemonitoring of people can be a strategy, but then up to me, the mobile app can help you between consultations. So if you really have a important mental health issue, you need to have synchronic communication with your healthcare professional, psychologist, psychiatrist, occupational therapist, whoever. And you need therapy. If you are seriously damaged in your mental health issues, then I think you should go straight ahead to the hospital and try to at least stop the first situations. But once this is not that serious, but it's important, I think teleconsultation is a tool that can help, but good apps can help you in doing some exercises and some strategies in order that you don't lose time between one consultation and the other one. If between the two you have 2 weeks, maybe you can do the same as in these therapies daily at home on your own. And if these apps are able to be connected through a chatbot, for instance, to a professional, or have a red button for alarms, emergency situations, then it gives you the feeling of not being alone and being connected. And in case you really need something very quick, you need to have it. And maybe the feeling has to be not only a feeling, it has to be really defined an intervention again, where this alarm, red button alarm really works. Otherwise, it's not a good, it's just to have it in the application, but it's not connected to the health system. Wow, then it's a problem more than a solution. But I think there's a lot to be done in terms of in my context, in the public health system, mental health is not the topic where more resources are invested. So technology can be a good solution to start investing resources.
Okay, thank you, Professor Kam. Okay, yeah, there is many things to be done in the mental health condition, in developing apps for mental health, condition. And will you please, I think there is one question as well, one question left. Mbak Vena, tolong dinaikkan sebentar, Mbak. Yeah. Is it important for health apps to have a partnership with social media or any internet platform that already have bigger users or download, number of download?
Yeah, I understand what you mean. So difficult because the most popular social media belongs to specific companies, as you know, and the control of data and the control even of the behavior of the people is on the table. So if you want to do a good health promotion intervention, it's important to use Facebook, it's important to use Instagram, it's important to use TikTok. I don't have any problem with that. But be careful, because it's going to be biased for sure. And maybe the final result is not going to be the one you were expecting. But it's true that through this platform you reach many people. And I know some experiences in the health system here, but also in big hospitals here, that they have their own like social media. And so all the contents that are distributed through these platforms are quite robust and quite evidence-based. And so what somebody is really controlling and improving and identifying problems whenever they exist. This is not possible through the other media, but it's true, for instance, that if you want to, I don't know, target to teenagers, you should use TikTok. Otherwise, you won't reach them. But be aware that reaching more people sometimes means losing the control of the message and the control of the target audience. That's the risk, but sometimes it's worth it to take this risk.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's very interesting then. There are pros and cons if we involving more stakeholders. Yeah. Okay, now we can move to Ibu Wahyu. Yeah. There is a question for Ibu Wahyu. Ini how to understand the demand of the community in Indonesia and how to understand the characteristic of media. The characteristic of media in order to publish a content effectively. Monggo Bu Wahyu, gimana nih?
Baik, terima kasih. Ini yang tanya siapa ya? Mbak atau Mas gitu. Terima kasih atas pertanyaannya. Saya jawab pertanyaan poin pertama gitu ketika bertanya bagaimana cara memahami kebutuhan masyarakat Indonesia. Kita harus pahami dulu bahwa masyarakat Indonesia itu sangat plural. Jadi juga konteks setting sosial masyarakatnya itu ketika kita membuat konten gitu tuh kita harus paham juga. Tadi saya bilang ada targetnya siapa. Apakah misalnya masyarakat Jogja atau masyarakat nasional secara umum atau misalnya masyarakat misalnya Jakarta gitu. Itu harus kita tentukan di awal. Kenapa demikian? Karena itu akan berasosiasi dengan redaksi mungkin, konten mungkin, dan juga bisa jadi pengalaman yang terjadi di wilayah Jakarta misalnya akan berbeda dengan Jogja. Misalnya Jakarta yang zonanya katanya sudah hitam dan sebagainya, tentu akan berbeda dalam konteks Jogja gitu kan misalnya. Nah, itu yang harus diidentifikasi dulu. Kebutuhan masyarakat yang setting seperti apa. Itu yang karena nanti itu akan menentukan juga. Misalnya apakah kita juga akan membuat konten untuk masyarakat di desa kah, atau di kota dan sebagainya. Itu yang harus diidentifikasi. Nah, cara mengidentifikasinya kalau sekarang itu sebenarnya gampang ya. Karena setiap ibu rumah tangga, bapak-bapak itu sudah punya WhatsApp semua gitu. Biasanya strategi yang saya ingat banget waktu pertama kali karena UGM itu kan berusaha untuk mengatasi COVID, salah satunya kolaborasi antar fakultas, satunya juga antara Visipol dan juga FKKMK gitu, kita analisa media dan lain sebagainya gitu. Saya ingat banget itu awal yang kita lakukan yaitu mapping, salah satunya di situ ada yang bertugas untuk memantau memapping kebutuhan masyarakat melalui WhatsApp group yang ada di masyarakat gitu, karena kebetulan ada komunitas saya lupa namanya waktu itu, ada Mas Krisna dan kawan-kawan kalau nggak salah waktu itu. Nah itu yang harus dipahami. Jadi harus kita mau skupnya yang mana dulu untuk bikin konten. Jadi setelah itu kita tahu, konten ini lebih baik mengarah ke begini karena masyarakat di sana mengalami hal ini gitu. Itu kalau mau sifatnya benar-benar menjawab kebutuhan masyarakat gitu. Kemudian option pertanyaan kedua, bagaimana cara memahami karakteristik semua media yang ada untuk efektivitas publishing konten. Ini karakteristik media sosial ya, atau maksudnya media massa, seperti apa ya, Nggih? Mohon maaf, mungkin saya biar tidak salah menjawab, ini karakteristik semua media yang akan kita gunakan untuk publishing konten, media sosial kan berarti yang dimaksud. Kalau misalnya media sosial misalnya, itu tadi, kalau misalnya target kita misalnya masyarakat di desa yang sudah lansia misalnya, kan nggak mungkin dong kita posting di Instagram gitu kan. Bisa jadi mereka lebih familiar pakai HP HP-nya misalnya oke lah tetap ada WhatsApp ya, kalau umur 60 tahun, 70 tahun tak pikir masih bisa ini ya, kadang punya WhatsApp juga karena sekarang lagi ngetren gitu kan. Itu bolehlah lewat WhatsApp gitu kan. Nah, kalau misalnya tiba-tiba kita targetnya anak muda gitu, di mana anak muda kan sekarang udah TikTok dan lain sebagainya, bolehlah kita produksi dengan TikTok tuh juga nggak apa-apa sebenarnya, it's okay gitu. We can produce the content via TikTok gitu. Jadi itu tadi tentukan dulu targetnya, baru kita akan bisa memutuskan media mana yang relevan untuk kita ekspor dan kita buat gitu. Itu mungkin Bu Fatwa.
Oke, menarik sekali ini. Ini sepertinya yang Mas Fahmi itu, yang Mas Fahmi ingin tanyakan terutama adalah ini Bu. Bagaimana kemudian menentukan ininya, message-nya, pesan utamanya itu gimana itu? Pesan utama yang mau kita sampaikan. Ini kan beda ya antara pesan yang kita dapatkan dari pengamatan tadi, jadi isu apa yang beredar di masyarakat, kemudian pesan yang mau di-deliver yang apa nih, gitu. Nah, itu mungkin yang seperti yang kita diskusikan beberapa waktu lalu di meeting ya. Monggo.
Jadi dulu itu saya selalu bertemu dengan Bu Fatwa online. Jadi saya kenal Bu Fatwa sampai sekarang belum pernah ketemu langsung gitu. Mau kasus ya Bu. Jadi kita bertemu langsung gitu, lihat langsung kecantikan Bu Fatwa ya. Oke. Jadi contoh di kasus vaksin ini ya misalnya, saya sebagai masyarakat, kemudian saya memposisikan diri sebagai masyarakat umum, kemudian saya melihat orang-orang sekitar saya gitu kan. Kadang saya iseng aja kalau bertemu orang gitu, atau mungkin melihat komen-komen yang ada di Instagram, di Facebook dan sebagainya, misalnya salah satu topiknya misalnya vaksin. Sebenarnya apa sih yang mereka tanyakan gitu kan? Saya coba memetakan, kemudian saya kategorisasikan coding. Jadi ibaratnya itu skill riset tuh benar-benar terpakai juga gitu ketika analisa media semacam ini tuh kan memang basisnya juga skillnya untuk itu gitu. Jadi saya mapping sebenarnya kebutuhan mereka apa gitu. Apa sih yang banyak ditanyakan gitu. Berarti informasi, karena kita kan kalau main konten itu kan berarti main informasi ya. Kita berusaha untuk mensuplai informasi yang relevan sesuai kebutuhan orang yang menjadi sasaran atau target kita gitu kan. Nah, kita coba kumpulkan itu dulu, kita coding gitu. Kalau dulu awal-awal COVID itu di UGM kan karena saya bagian PJ untuk media gitu, saya setiap hari itu saya ada 5 orang yang membantu gitu. 1 orang tugas di Facebook, 1 orang tugas di ini saya sudah bagi gitu, 1 orang ada di WhatsApp, 1 orang di apa. Saya kumpulkan setiap hari, jadi setiap malam tuh saya analisis, saya coding gitu, ini kata kuncinya apa, keywordnya apa gitu. Kemudian saya tahu, oh ini kebutuhannya ini. Contoh ketika waktu itu sebulan sebelum puasa gitu. Orang masih sibuk dengan apa itu COVID, orang sibuk dengan lockdown gitu. Tapi mereka lupa bahwa masyarakat kita itu punya kebiasaan pulang kampung itu mudik. Nah, ketika pemerintah nggak aware gitu, karena jujur aja ada pemerintah yang ready untuk mengatasi gitu kan. Nah, ya padahal kalau saya lihat aktivitas orang Indonesia umumnya ini ada mudik nih, tapi di media dari semua yang saya keluarkan, pemerintah nggak ada perhatian ke situ dan sebagainya. Bahkan membentuk apa itu ada yang nggak boleh gitu kan kalau nggak salah. Nah itu selain kita
suaranya kok putus-putus.
Mapping itu kadang kita harus, halo sudah dengar belum Bu? Aduh, hidup di dunia negara ketiga itu gini. Oke, sudah dengar belum Bu?
Sudah.
Jadi selain target, kemudian mapping topik, kita itu juga dituntut untuk ke depan kira masyarakat akan punya cenderungan seperti apa gitu. Kira-kira pemikiran mereka seperti apa. Jadi kayak kita tuh jadi kayak semi cenayang gitu ya. Jadi bisa ngelihat oh masyarakat kayak gini. Sebenarnya itu bisa kita refleksikan dari bagaimana kita dan orang-orang sekitar kita. Jadi kenapa tadi saya bilang juga sensitivitas kita sebagai pengamat itu penting banget ketika kita melakukan analisa semacam ini, apalagi untuk advokasi sosial, karena sebenarnya hal yang kita lakukan ketika memproduksi konten untuk kampanye itu kan bagian dari kegiatan advokasi sosial. Nah, itu sensitivitas dan juga pemikiran kritis. Kenapa sih kok masyarakat nggak bisa berubah perilakunya gitu? Kenapa sih sekarang kok masyarakat kok nggak mengindahkan protokol kesehatan gitu? Padahal clear gitu. Kenapa sih masyarakat mengandalkan banget vaksin? Karena kan padahal vaksin kan bisa jadi itu bukan obat gitu loh. Kadang kan kita bertanya itu loh, kenapa sih begini? Karena kan seharusnya begini, bla bla bla. Nah, gap macam itu, gap yang kita rasa dasen, dasolen semacam itu yang coba kita bangun sejak awal. Kita selalu bertanya, nggak stop bertanya kenapa kejadian itu terjadi. Sebenarnya itu modal awal kita untuk membangun pemikiran kritis. Itu sih. Jadi kita selalu bertanya kenapa masyarakat begitu, kenapa hanya sebagian yang begini, kenapa ada yang sebagian begini dan sebagainya. Jadi pertanyaan kenapa, why itu selalu didengungkan. Nah, itu awal untuk berlatih untuk sensitivitas dan juga untuk berpikir kritis. Itu mungkin untuk pertanyaan yang itu.
Ya. Jadi kata kuncinya being sensitive ya.
Yeah,
we need to be sensitive in order to understand what the demand of the community, what kind of message that they need to know gitu ya. Kemudian ini mungkin ada satu pertanyaan dengan jawaban yang singkat mungkin Bu Wahyu tentang privacy Bu Wahyu. Poin apa yang perlu kita lindungi kalau kita ngambil gambar, video atau sesuatu untuk konten ya, sejauh mana kita minta privasinya itu?
Kalau konten, kalau etika, kalau riset itu kan juga ada etikanya, publish konten itu kan juga ada etikanya. Misalnya memposting foto anak itu kan juga sebenarnya ada aturannya sendiri gitu kan. Memposting foto pasien yang kemarin sangat banyak dilakukan quote and quote pelanggaran gitu. Posting itu sebenarnya tidak etik, tidak istilahnya tidak sesuai etika lah. Nah, hal-hal semacam itu yang harus mana yang baik dan yang enggak gitu. Dan yang paling penting adalah begini, khawatir juga ketika kita posting itu walaupun kita menyampaikan sesuatu secara benar, tapi lagi-lagi kita juga harus berpikir dampaknya gitu. Tapi bukan berarti karena kekhawatiran untuk berpikir dampak yang negatif, kemudian kita berusaha untuk menutupi banyak hal. Enggak. Jadi kita harus pandai menimbang mana yang layak, kemudian kita juga harus tahu konsekuensinya. Jadi kita juga harus berani menanggung konsekuensi ketika kita publish, resikonya apa gitu. Nah, itu yang makanya perlu brainstorming berkali-kali sebelum akhirnya publish gitu. Jadi konten yang ada di media, bahkan kalau teman-teman melihat di media massa misalnya kayak paparan dan lain sebagainya, kalau lihat di IG itu kan setiap jam itu kan pasti banyak keluar gitu. Itu mereka ada prosesnya, bahkan kayak Tirto ID, kemudian The Conversation dan lain sebagainya. Mereka ada tim khusus yang selalu diskusi terus tiada henti gitu. Nah, proses itu makanya mereka proses evaluasi, proses kreasi lagi itu berjalan stimulus terus menerus. Itu sih mungkin Bu yang bisa saya sampaikan.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bu Wahyu. Because the time is not permitting us, perhaps, could you please, Professor Karm and also Bu Wahyu, to give a key message to us on how to improve the health of the community using the creating the media and also using the e-health or m-health. Would you please, Professor Karm?
Yes, I would just recommend, first of all, think outside the box. So not do things in the same way you've been doing them, but think completely differently. Working also with different people, so approaching the multidisciplinarity, and always considering the final user as the person with whom to work with.
Okay, thank you, Professor Karm. Ini Bu Wahyu, mungkin ada kata atau kalimat-kalimat kunci, pesan kunci yang mau disampaikan?
Kalau saya pribadi selalu bilang ke semua orang bahwa kita semua bagian dari masyarakat. Pandemi ini misalnya itu bukan isu dari individu semata, tapi isu kita bersama gitu. Jadi kita harus jalan itu bersama. Jadi kalau misalnya dalam konteks kita sekarang advokasi sosial gitu untuk produksi konten dan sebagainya, lagi-lagi utamakan publik, utamakan masyarakat, kebutuhan mereka gitu. Jadi please tekan dulu kepentingan individu, kepentingan kelompok gitu, karena kita lagi fight bersama ini. Itu sih mungkin Bu.
Oke, terima kasih Bu Wahyu. Jadi we need to think outside the box and working with many people, different people, and also we need to think mainly for the benefit of the community ya Bu Wahyu ya. Okay, I think we are now in the end of the seminar, but before we end the seminar, do you mind if we have a documentation in a picture? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, would you please turn on your video so that we can take our picture together? Mbak Lutfi, tolong apakah ada yang bisa mendokumentasikan?
Ya Bu, ya.
Yeah, okay. We have around 300, almost 250 audience now that join with us. There are also some join in YouTube channel. Oke, mungkin dalam hitungan dihitung siapa ya nih yang mendokumentasikan? Who will going to take the picture?
Saya Bu Fatwa.
Okay. Will you please count and tell us so we can give our big smile?
Yeah, okay. For the first slide, please smile. 1, 2, 3. Hold on. And then the second slide. 1, 2, 3. The third slide. 1, 2, 3.
Oh, there are 10 slides.
Yeah.
And we don't know which slide we are belong to. Okay, and then?
Ya, sebentar Bu Fatwa, ini masih slide ke-5.
Okay. Sure, go on.
Sudah Bu Fatwa.
Okay, thank you very much, Mbak Lutfi. Thank you very much, Bu Wahyu, and also Professor Khan for your time and your valuable presentation and your valuable ideas on behalf of the School of Public Health, Faculty of Medicine, Public Health and Nursing, Universitas Gadjah Mada. We want to express our best appreciation. We believe that your valuable contribution will enhance for further collaboration. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your participation, and please give applause to Bu Wahyu and Professor Kam. And finally, we come to the end of the Wednesday serial seminar. May I thank you also for your participation in this session, ladies and gentlemen, and also especially guest speakers. I hope you enjoyed the whole program, and I look forward to your participation in the next session. Okay. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Thank you.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih, Dok.
Thank you.
Thank you, Profesor Kam. Thank you, Bu Wahyu ya.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.